The coin purse felt lighter than a dying man's breath in Cormac Thorne's weathered palm as he counted the meager contents for the third time. 12 silver dollars and a handful of copper pennies. Barely enough for a decent plow horse, let alone the strong draft animal his failing ranch desperately needed. The autumn wind of 1887 cut through his patched coat like a rusty blade as he approached the weathered gate of the Fairweather Horse Trading Post. Mr. Thorne. A voice cracked like breaking timber behind him. He turned to see old Henrik Fairweather, limping across the muddy yard, his left leg dragging from an old cavalry wound. Heard you were coming. Got something might interest you, strong mare. Good bloodlines, only asking $15. Cormac's heart sank. $3 short, and that was assuming Henrik would even negotiate. I appreciate it, Henrik, but I'm running a bit thin this season. Lost half my cattle to that early frost, and the banks breathing down my neck like a hungry wolf. Henrik's gray eyes softened with understanding. The drought had hit every rancher in Millbrook Valley hard, turning green pastures into cracked earth and dreams into dust. Well now, let's take a look at what I got. Maybe we can work something out. They walked toward the horse paddock, their boots squelching in the October mud. That's when Cormac saw her, a young woman mucking out stalls with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew what hunger felt like. Her dress, if it could be called that, was little more than burlap sacking held together with hope and string. Auburn hair escaped from beneath a tattered kerchief, and despite the grime on her face, there was something striking about the determined set of her jaw. That's Cordelia, Henrik muttered, following Cormac's gaze. Found her half dead by the creek last spring. Been working for room and board ever since, though Lord knows I can barely afford to feed myself, let alone hired help. The girl Cordelia looked up as they approached, and Cormac felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes held the color of storm clouds, gray and fierce, with an intelligence that seemed at odds with her ragged appearance. She quickly looked away, returning to her work with renewed intensity. Here's the mare I mentioned. Henrik gestured to a chestnut horse with strong hindquarters and alert eyes. 5 years old, good temperament, pulls like the devil himself when she's motivated. Cormac ran his hands along the horse's flanks, checking for soundness. The animal was everything Henrik claimed, exactly what his ranch needed to survive the coming winter. But $15 might as well have been $1,500. She's beautiful. Henrik, but please. The word came soft as a whisper, but it stopped both men cold. Cordelia had approached them, clutching a pitchfork in her calloused hands. Please, Mr. Thorne. Take me instead. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Cormac stared at this slip of a girl who had just offered herself in place of livestock, and something ancient stirred in his soul, part protector, part something he dared not name. Miss, I don't think you understand, he began. I understand. Perfectly. Her chin lifted with pride that poverty couldn't diminish. You need help on your ranch, and I need somewhere to belong that isn't charity. I can work harder than any horse you'll find, and I eat less too. Cormac's first instinct was to laugh, but the desperate sincerity in Cordelia's storm-gray eyes killed the sound in his throat. Miss Cordelia, is it? A ranch is no place for a young woman. The work is backbreaking, and I live alone out there. It wouldn't be proper. Proper? Her laugh held more bitterness than a green persimmon. Mr. Thorne, I've been sleeping in Henrik's barn loft for 6 months, eating table scraps when they're available, and working 16-hour days just to earn the right to exist. Your idea of proper and mine might be different. Henrik shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face flushing red. Now, Cordelia, you know I've done my best by you. You have, she said quickly, her voice softening, and I'm grateful. But winter's coming, and we both know you can't afford to keep me. I've seen the ledger books, Henrik. You're 3 months behind on everything. The old horse trader's shoulders sagged in defeat. Times had been hard on everyone in Millbrook Valley, but Henrik had been hit worse than most. His wife's long illness before her death had drained his savings, and the poor harvest season had left him struggling to feed his animals, let alone pay for human help. Cormac studied the girl, really looked at her this time. Beneath the grime and ragged clothing, he could see the strength in her shoulders, the calluses on her hands that spoke of honest work, and something else, pride. Real pride, not the false kind that came from easy living, but the bone-deep dignity that survived, even when everything else was stripped away. "You said you eat less than a horse," he found himself saying. "But can you work like one?" Her eyes flashed with something that might have been hope. "Try me. I've got 200 acres that need clearing before the snows come. Fence posts need setting, a barn roof that's been leaking since last spring, and cattle that need driving to winter pasture. The work starts before dawn and ends after dark. I can offer room and board, and maybe a small wage come spring if the ranch turns a profit. And if it doesn't turn a profit?" Cormac's smile was grim. "Then we'll both be looking for work come spring." Cordelia extended her hand, and when Cormac took it, he was surprised by the firmness of her grip. "Deal, Mr. Thorne. Just Cormac," he said. "If we're going to work together, might as well dispense with the formalities." "Cordelia Ramsay," she replied. "And I should warn you, I don't know much about cattle or ranching. I grew up in the city before ... before everything went wrong. What do you know? I can cook, clean, mend clothes, keep books, and I learned fast. I also know how to handle men who think a woman in need is easy prey." She gave him a level look that made him wonder what hardships had driven her to Henrik's barn in the first place. "Fair enough. We'll leave in the morning if that suits you." As they shook hands again, sealing the arrangement, Cormac couldn't shake the feeling that he was making either the best decision of his life or the worst. But as autumn wind rattled through the bare branches overhead and Cordelia's eyes met his with unwavering determination, he decided some risks were worth taking. That night, as he lay on Henrik's spare cot listening to the October rain drumming against the windows, Cormac wondered what force of circumstance had brought a city-bred woman to a horse trader's barn. More troubling still, he wondered why the thought of her leaving come spring already felt like a lost dot in the loft above. Cordelia stared at the rough-hewn rafters and allowed herself the first spark of hope she'd felt in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since her world had collapsed, she had somewhere to go that wasn't backwards. Dawn broke cold and sharp across Millbrook Valley as Cormac loaded Cordelia's meager belongings, a battered carpet bag, and a worn leather satchel into his weather-beaten wagon. The mist clung to the valley floor like smoke from a dying campfire, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called out its liquid notes to the gray morning. "Ready?" he asked, extending a calloused hand to help her onto the wagon seat. "As I'll ever be." Cordelia settled beside him, her spine straight despite the threadbare shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The borrowed dress Henrik's late wife had worn was still too big, but it was whole cloth instead of burlap patches. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they left the horse trading post behind. For the first mile, neither spoke, each lost in their own thoughts about the arrangement they'd struck. The silence might have been uncomfortable if not for the easy way Cordelia handled the wagon's rough bouncing, never once grabbing for support or complaining about the jolting ride. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, her breath forming small clouds in the morning air. 200 acres of stubborn earth and false promises," Cormac replied, his eyes fixed on the rutted road ahead. "My father bought it from a man who claimed the soil was rich and the water rights were solid. Half true, as it turned out. The soil's rich enough when it rains, but the creek runs dry 3 years out of 5. What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly." Some horses when I can afford good breeding stock. Had a kitchen garden that my mother tended before." He trailed off, and Cordelia caught the shadow that passed over his features. "Before? Fever took both my parents 2 winters back. Same week. Left me with the ranch, the debts, and more questions than answers about how to make it all work." Cordelia studied his profile, the strong jaw dusted with morning stubble, the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many harsh suns and facing too many hard truths. "How old are you, Cormac?" 28. You? 23. Though some days I feel twice that. They crested a small hill, and the Thorne Ranch spread out before them in the valley below. Cordelia's breath caught in her throat. Despite Cormac's grim description, there was something beautiful about the place. The main house, though small and weathered, sat solid and square against the hillside. A red barn with a leaking roof, Cormac had mentioned, stood near a creek that sparkled in the morning light. Cattle dotted the far pasture like brown and black stones, and the mountains rose beyond it all in purple majesty. "It's not much to look at," Cormac said, misreading her silence for disappointment. "It's perfect," she breathed, and meant it. After months of sleeping in a barn loft and eating charity scraps, the sight of a place where she might truly belong, was more beautiful than any mansion could have been. As they descended toward the ranch, Cordelia noticed things that spoke to harder realities. Fence posts that leaned at dangerous angles, a pasture gate hanging by one hinge, shingles missing from the barn roof where autumn rain would find its way through. The work ahead would be brutal, but it would be hers to do. "There's something you should know," Cormac said as they approached the house. "I've never had a woman working here before. Never had any help at all, truth be told. If the arrangement doesn't work out, if you find the work too hard or the situation uncomfortable, I'll see you get safe passage back to town. No questions asked." Cordelia turned to face him fully. "And if you decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth, same deal. But I have a feeling," he paused, studying her determined expression, "that won't be the problem." As the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the modest ranch house, Cordelia felt something she hadn't experienced since her world had crumbled around her. In Chicago, the possibility of a future that didn't involve running from her past. Neither of them could have guessed that by spring. Their carefully practical arrangement would transform into something that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd worked to build. The ranch house interior reflected its owner's solitary existence, functional, sparse and achingly clean in the way of a man who had learned to take care of himself out of necessity rather than choice. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a simple wooden table and 2 chairs arranged before it. The kitchen occupied one corner, equipped with a cast-iron stove and shelves holding neat rows of preserving jars. "Your room's upstairs," Cormac said, carrying Cordelia's bags toward a narrow staircase. "Used to be my parents'. I moved to the smaller room after. After. There's a lock on the door if it makes you feel safer." Cordelia followed him up the creaking stairs, noting the faded wallpaper and the way morning light filtered through clean but patched curtains. The bedroom was simple but comfortable, a double bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. "It's wonderful," she said, setting her hand on the windowsill. The view looked out over the entire valley, with the creek winding silver through green pastures and the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. "Wonderful?" Cormac's eyebrows rose. "It's just a room, Cordelia. It's my room," she corrected. "First one I've had in over a year." Something in her voice made him turn to study her face. "What happened to you? In the city, I mean." "You don't have to tell me, but my father was a bookkeeper," she said, still gazing out the window. "Honest man, or so everyone thought. Turned out he'd been skimming from his employer for years to pay gambling debts. When they caught him, they took everything: house, furniture, even my mother's jewelry. Father couldn't face the shame, so he—" She shrugged, the gesture failing to mask the pain. "Mother died of grief 2 months later. Left me with nothing but debts and a name that opened no doors." "Is that why you ended up here?" "I worked as a seamstress for a while, then in a factory. But word gets around in a city. 'Daughter of the thief,' they'd whisper. Jobs became scarce, and lodging scarcer still. When I heard there might be work in the territories, I spent my last dollar on a train ticket west." Cormac leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "That's a long way to fall." "The falling wasn't the hard part," Cordelia said, turning from the window to face him. "It was learning to get back up that nearly killed me." Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than courtesy demanded. In that shared look, each recognized something in the other, the particular resilience that came from losing everything and choosing to rebuild rather than surrender. "Well," Cormac said, breaking the spell, "if you're done settling in, I'll show you around the property. Best you know what you've gotten yourself into." The tour took the better part of 2 hours. Cormac walked her through the barn, explaining the care and feeding of the dozen horses and 30 head of cattle that represented his entire fortune. He showed her the chicken coop that produced barely enough eggs to keep them fed, the vegetable garden plot that would need preparing for winter, and the endless miles of fence line that seemed to require constant mending. "Biggest problem is the north pasture," he said as they walked along a fence that sagged between rotting posts. "Lost a quarter of my herd last spring when they broke through here and wandered onto garrison land. He's not the neighborly type, charged me $50 to get them back." $50? Cordelia's eyes widened. "That's highway robbery. Legal highway robbery. Garrison owns half the county, including the sheriff. Man's got political ambitions, and stepping on smaller ranchers is just his way of clearing a path to what he wants." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley, they returned to the house to find a rider approaching. The man sat his horse with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to intimidating others through presence alone. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished, and his smile held all the warmth of a snake preparing to strike. "Thorne," the rider called out as he reined up near the porch. "Heard you were hiring help. Didn't expect it to be the decorative kind." Cormac stepped slightly in front of Cordelia, a protective gesture so automatic he probably wasn't aware of it. "Garrison, what brings you to my property uninvited?" "Just being neighborly," Garrison replied, his pale eyes sliding over Cordelia in a way that made her skin crawl. "Wanted to remind you that your note comes due next month. Wouldn't want any distractions ... to make you forget your obligations." The threat hung in the air between them like gun smoke, and Cordelia realized that their struggle to save the ranch had just become considerably more complicated. "The note's not due until November 15th, Cormac said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from his shoulders. "I've got 3 weeks, Garrison, and I intend to use every day of them." Beaumont Garrison's laugh was as cold as winter wind through a cemetery. 3 weeks to raise $400? That's ambitious, even for a dreamer like you. His gaze shifted back to Cordelia, lingering in a way that made her want to reach for something sharp. "Of course, I might be willing to discuss more flexible terms if you're open to alternative arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Cordelia stepped out from behind Cormac before he could stop her. She dealt with men like Garrison before, predators who mistook desperation for weakness. The kind where a beautiful woman earns her keep in more pleasant ways than mucking stalls and mending fences. Garrison's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm always in need of companionship at my estate. Civilized companionship." Cormac moved so fast Cordelia barely saw him grab the bridle of Garrison's horse. "You've got 5 seconds to apologize." To the lady and right off my land before I drag you down from that saddle." "Easy, Thorne." Garrison's hand moved casually to rest on his gun butt. "No need for unpleasantness. I was simply making a business proposition. Miss ... "Ramsey," Cordelia said, her chin tilted at an angle that suggested Garrison could take his proposition and choke on it. "And I'm not interested in your kind of business." "Pity. You'd live better at my place than you will when this ranch gets foreclosed on." Garrison gathered his reins, but his pale eyes remained fixed on Cormac. $400, Thorne. 3 weeks. Don't make me come looking for it." He wheeled his horse around and cantered away, leaving dust and implied threats hanging in the autumn air. Cormac watched until the rider disappeared over the hill before turning to Cordelia. "I should have warned you about him," he said. "Garrison's been trying to buy this land for 2 years. Made Father several offers before he died." "What does he want with it?" "Water rights mostly. My creek feeds into the main river that runs through his property. Control the source, control the flow." Cormac kicked at a loose stone, his frustration evident. $400 might as well be 4,000. Even if we sell every head of cattle, we'd only raise half that. Cordelia studied his profile, noting the way defeat seemed to settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "What if we don't have to sell the cattle?" "What do you mean? I grew up around books and numbers, remember? My father may have been a thief, but he taught me how money works before he lost his mind to gambling." She began pacing, her mind working through possibilities. "Garrison wants this land, but he needs you to default on the loan to get it cheaply. What if we could find a way to make him pay fair market value instead?" Cormac's laugh was bitter. "Even fair market value wouldn't help if we can't make the payment." "Maybe not. But what if we could make the ranch profitable enough that other buyers would be interested?" "Create a bidding war? In 3 weeks?" "Cordelia, you're talking about miracles." She stopped pacing and fixed him with a look that reminded him of storm clouds gathering strength. "I've seen what you can do with this land, Cormac. The pastures are rich, the water runs clean when it runs at all, and you've got good breeding stock. The problem isn't the ranch, it's the marketing." "Marketing? When's the last time you actually sold cattle at market instead of just trading them for supplies?" Cormac thought about it. 2 years? Maybe 3. Father always just bartered with the general store or traded with neighbors. And horse breeding? This valley is perfect for it. Mountain air, clean water, good grazing. But I haven't seen you advertising breeding services or training programs. Don't have the capital to expand. You don't need capital. You need customers. Cordelia's eyes began to shine with the kind of fervor that had probably gotten her father into trouble, but in her case seemed focused on building rather than destroying. "There's a cattle drive coming through next month, isn't there? I heard Henrik mention it." "The Millerton drive, yes. But they're just passing through." "What if they weren't just passing through? What if they had a reason to stop, rest their animals, maybe make some purchases?" For the first time since Garrison's visit, Cormac felt a spark of something that might have been hope. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we turn this ranch into something Garrison can't ignore and can't afford to wait for. Something that forces his hand before that note comes due." As sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Cordelia began outlining a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Cormac found himself listening not just to her words, but to the passion behind them, the fierce determination of a woman who had lost everything once and refused to let it happen again. By the time stars appeared overhead, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The next 2 weeks transformed the Thorne Ranch into a whirlwind of activity that would have seemed impossible when Cormac was working alone. Cordelia attacked each challenge with the methodical precision of a general planning a campaign, and her energy proved infectious. The Millerton Cattle Drive will have nearly 200 head, she explained as they worked together to repair the north pasture fence. They'll need fresh grazing, clean water, and a place to rest the horses. If we can provide that plus some additional services, we can charge enough to make a serious dent in that $400. Cormac drove another fence post into the hard ground, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. What kind of additional services? Veterinary care for injured animals, fresh supplies, maybe even hot meals for the trail crew. I've been reading your father's old journals. He used to do some horse doctoring before arthritis made it too difficult. I know some of it, Cormac admitted. But cooking for a dozen trail hands? That's asking a lot. Cordelia's smile was mischievous. Remember what I told you about learning fast? By the end of the first week, she'd somehow convinced old Doc Harwell to teach her basic veterinary skills in exchange for helping organize his chaotic medical records. The second week found her practicing trail cooking techniques with supplies donated by sympathetic townspeople who'd heard about their struggle against Garrison's land grab. Half this county has reason to dislike Beaumont Garrison, Doc Harwell explained as he showed Cordelia how to stitch a cut on one of Cormac's horses. Man's been buying up small properties and driving people out for years. You two might just be the ones to finally give him a fight worth watching. The physical transformation of the ranch was equally dramatic. Working from dawn to dusk, they repaired buildings, cleared brush, and created a proper staging area for large groups of livestock. Cordelia's city upbringing had given her an eye for organization and efficiency that complemented Cormac's raw knowledge of ranching. You're different than I expected, Cormac said one evening as they sat on the porch after another 16-hour day. The October air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song to the rising moon. Different how? Stronger. More ... He searched for the right word. More fierce, I guess. When you first asked to come work here, I thought I was getting a charity case. Someone who needed rescuing. Cordelia's laugh held no humor. I learned a long time ago that the only person who can rescue you is yourself. Everything else is just temporary assistance. Is that what this is? Temporary assistance? The question hung between them in the cooling air. Over the past 2 weeks, their working relationship had evolved into something neither had expected. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of longtime partners, anticipating each other's needs and filling in each other's gaps without conscious thought. I don't know, Cordelia said finally. I suppose that depends on whether we can save your ranch. Our ranch, Cormac corrected quietly. She turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her features. Cormac, I mean it. Whatever happens with Garrison, whatever we manage to build here, you've earned a stake in. It more than earned it. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, and even in the dim moonlight, Cormac recognized Garrison's bulky silhouette. Thorne. Garrison's voice carried across the yard. Heard you've been making improvements. Thought I'd come see for myself. Cormac stood slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Little late for social calls, isn't it, Garrison? Maybe, but I'm curious about these rumors I'm hearing. Something about you planning to host the Millerton Drive? Garrison rode closer, his 2 companions flanking him like wolves preparing to cut a calf from the herd. That seems ambitious for a man about to lose his land. The note isn't due for another week, Cordelia said, stepping up beside Cormac. Unless you've changed the terms again? No change is necessary, Miss Ramsey. But I do want to make sure Thorne understands the ... consequences of failing to meet his obligations. The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and both riders behind Him shifted in their saddles in a way that suggested they were more than simple ranch hands. "We understand perfectly," Cormac replied. "Question is whether you understand the consequences of trespassing on private property after dark." The tension stretched taut as a wire fence in winter until Garrison suddenly laughed. "No need for hostility, Thorne. I just wanted to wish you luck with your little venture. You're going to need it." As quickly as they'd appeared, the three riders melted back into the darkness, leaving behind only hoof prints and the lingering sense that the real battle for the ranch was about to begin. The Millerton cattle drive arrived on a Tuesday morning that dawned clear and sharp as broken glass. Cordelia watched from the kitchen window as nearly 200 head of longhorn cattle flowed into their prepared pasture like a brown and white river. The trail boss, a weathered man named Joaquin Mendoza, rode at the head of a dozen equally tough-looking cowboys, who eyed the ranch setup with the critical gaze of men who'd seen every kind of hospitality the frontier had to offer. "Senator Thorne," Mendoza called out as he dismounted near the house. "We heard in town that you might have services for weary travelers. Fresh grazing, clean water, hot food, and basic veterinary care," Cormac replied, shaking the trail boss's calloused hand. "Fair prices and honest dealing." Mendoza nodded approvingly as he surveyed the organized staging area, the clearly marked water troughs, and the temporary cooking station Cordelia had set up near the barn. "You run a professional operation here. What are your rates?" For the next hour, they negotiated terms while Cordelia directed the trail crew to the various services they offered. 3 horses needed attention for minor injuries, the entire crew needed feeding, and several of the cowboys were interested in purchasing fresh supplies from town. "This is good work," one of the younger cowboys told her as she stitched a cut on his horse's leg. "You learned this from a veterinarian?" "Doc Harwell in town," she replied, keeping her stitches small and even. "Amazing what you can learn when you're motivated." By evening, the ranch hummed with activity. The trail crew had settled around a large campfire where Cordelia served beef stew and fresh bread to men who'd been eating beans and hardtack for weeks. The conversation was lively, the payment generous, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, both Cormac and Cordelia allowed themselves to believe they might actually succeed. That's when Beaumont Garrison arrived. He rode up to the firelight with his usual arrogance, but tonight he brought 6 men instead of 2. The trail crew noticed immediately, their easy laughter fading into the watchful silence of men who could smell trouble on the wind. "Quite a gathering," Garrison observed, dismounting with theatrical flourish. "Hope you have permits for hosting commercial activities on residential property, Thorne." Mendoza stood slowly, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Is there a problem here, Senator?" "No problem at all," Garrison replied smoothly. "Just concerned about my neighbor's legal compliance. Wouldn't want any complications when the county assessor comes calling." "The county assessor?" Cordelia stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "You mean the one who happens to be your brother-in-law?" Garrison's smile was all predator. "Family connections can be so helpful in matters of proper documentation." The implied threat was clear. He could tie up their operation in legal complications until long after the note came due. But before anyone could respond, Mendoza laughed. "Senator Garrison, isn't it? I heard about you in town. The man who likes to buy land from people who can't afford lawyers." The trail boss's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that came from leading men through hostile territory for 20 years. "Funny thing about trail crews, though, we tend to look out for people who look out for us." "Is that supposed to intimidate me?" "Not at all. Just mentioning that my men and I will be testifying about the excellent, completely legal hospitality we received here when any county officials come asking questions. 12 honest witnesses can be very persuasive in court." Garrison's confident expression flickered, and Cormac realized they'd found an unexpected ally. But the land grabber wasn't finished yet. "How much are they paying you, Thorn, for all this?" When Cormac named the sum, Garrison nodded thoughtfully. "Not bad for a night's work. But still not enough to cover your note, is it?" "Getting closer," Cormac replied evenly. "Well, I'll make this simple. I'll double whatever they paid you right now, cash in hand. All you have to do is sign over the deed." The offer hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Double their earnings would actually leave them ahead of the game, and everyone knew it. Cordelia felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she waited for Cormac's answer. "Generous offer," Cormac said finally. "But there's something you don't understand about this place, Garrison." "What's that?" "It's not just about the money anymore." He looked around the firelit gathering at Mendoza and his crew, at the organized operation they'd built from nothing, at Cordelia standing proud and fierce in the flickering light. "It's about what we built here. What we can keep building." "You're making a mistake, Thorn." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Garrison remounted his horse, his face dark with fury. "You've got 1 week left. Don't come crying to me when you lose everything." As the land grabber and his men rode away, Mendoza clapped Cormac on the shoulder. "That took courage, amigo, but courage doesn't pay debts. You have a plan for the rest of that money?" Cormac looked at Cordelia, seeing his own determination reflected in her storm-gray eyes. "We're working on it." What he didn't say, what none of them could have predicted, was that word of their stand against Garrison was already spreading through the valley. By morning they would discover that sometimes the best way to save something precious is to be willing to fight for it in front of witnesses. The real question was whether their newfound reputation would be enough to save the ranch, or if Garrison had one final card to play that would destroy everything they'd built together. 3 days before the note came due, they had their answer.